He was the most famous singer alive. Yet on June 27, 1968, under the hot studio lights of NBC, a smiling TV host tried to tear Elvis Presley down in front of millions. Most stars would have cracked, but what Elvis did next silenced the room and changed his legend forever. Burbank, California, June 27, 1968. The NBC studios glowed with restless energy. It was the night of Elvis Presley's comeback special. 300 fans packed the small room, their ticket stubs clenched in sweaty hands. The cameras whirred. The lights burned hot against the stage. Backstage, Elvis adjusted the collar of his black leather jacket. His hands shook, though he tried to hide it. It had been years since he had faced a live crowd this way. For most of the 1960s, he had been trapped in Hollywood sound stages, making movies that critics mocked and fans only half loved. Now, everything rested on this one night. The director, Steve Binder, whispered a reminder. "Keep it real, Elvis. They need to see you again." Elvis nodded. He knew it was true. This wasn't just another show. This was a trial in front of the entire country. As the stagehands shifted microphones and chairs, the audience grew louder. Some chanted his name. Others whispered about whether he still had the same magic. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. When Elvis stepped out, the sound was deafening. Cheers roared. Women waved scarves. A man in the front row held up a sign. "The King still reigns." Elvis smiled faintly, but his heart pounded. Could he really prove himself again after so long away? The host of the program, standing stage left, smiled in a way that wasn't warm. He had already told jokes backstage about Elvis's weight, his accent, his films. Now, under the lights, Elvis could feel the same sharpness hidden behind that grin. But for now, the crowd only wanted music. Elvis adjusted his guitar strap, looked at the audience, and let the silence stretch. The mic hummed softly. For a moment, it seemed like the whole world was leaning forward. Every career reaches a crossroads. Would this be the night Elvis Presley reclaimed his crown? Or the night history decided he was finished? The host stepped forward, his voice smooth, the kind of tone that drew laughs in living rooms across America. But now it carried an edge. He turned toward Elvis, smiling, and cracked a joke about his time away making forgettable films. A few chuckles slipped from the audience, uneasy and forced. Elvis tilted his head slightly, his grin polite but stiff. The leather jacket creaked as he shifted. He had expected nerves, not ridicule. Cameras zoomed closer, ready to capture every flicker of his reaction. Then the host added more, teasing his southern drawl, the way he moved, even the glint of sweat under the hot stage lights. "The King!" he smirked. "Looks like he's melting under the crown." Laughter rose louder this time, though some fans frowned and looked down at their programs. For a second, it wasn't Elvis's night anymore. It was the host's show. The man with the microphone had the power to turn triumph into embarrassment. Behind the scenes, Colonel Tom Parker shifted in his seat, chewing nervously on his cigar. Sponsors wanted fun, not conflict. Binder, the director, whispered to a cameraman to hold tight on Elvis's face. "Don't look away," he said. "This moment matters." Elvis's eyes lowered, his lashes dark under the lights. He could fire back with a joke, he could freeze, or he could simply smile and let the laughter wash over him. But what choice would protect not just his pride, but his future? The room felt tense, charged. Every second dragged. Every breath of silence seemed like a verdict. What would you have done, standing there with millions watching? Laugh along? Fight back? Or find another way entirely? One thing was certain. The challenge was no longer about music. It was about dignity, and Elvis knew the world was waiting for his next move. The laughter died as quickly as it had risen. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the sting had gone too far. A woman in the second row, clutching a small notebook, shook her head. The energy in the room had shifted. The King was being tested, and everyone knew it. Elvis's fingers tightened on the neck of his guitar. The leather jacket clung to him under the heat. A bead of sweat traced down his cheek, catching the glare of the spotlight. He could almost feel the weight of the nation pressing against his chest. Colonel Parker leaned forward, whispering under his breath, "Smile, boy, just smile." But Elvis didn't move. His jaw was set, his body still. Every camera was locked on him. In homes across America, families leaned closer to their televisions, waiting for the reaction. This wasn't just a comeback special anymore. It had become a knife-edge moment. If he laughed along, the humiliation would stick forever. If he snapped, he'd confirm every cruel headline that called him washed up. But if he found a third path, something deeper, he could rewrite the story of his life in a single breath. The crowd seemed to sense this fragile balance. Their cheers earlier had been wild, but now the room was quiet, almost reverent. A cough echoed from the balcony. A program slipped from someone's hands, fluttering to the floor like a warning. Elvis glanced at the host. The man's smile was still wide, but his eyes were sharp, waiting for the slip. The tension stretched so thin it might break. Binder, crouched by the stage, whispered to a sound engineer, "Keep the mic open. Don't miss what happens next." The stakes were no longer private. This was his reputation, his legacy, his very crown hanging in the balance. Could Elvis still command a room? Could he still make strangers believe in him? It wasn't only about music. It was about respect, about whether the world still saw him as a king or as a relic from another time. The silence deepened, almost holy. Elvis adjusted the mic stand. His hand trembled just once, then steadied. His eyes lifted from the floor, locking with the crowd. Every person in that studio leaned forward, 300 souls, holding their breath, and then, with a faint smile, Elvis made his choice. The host's grin froze as Elvis leaned toward the microphone. The hush was absolute. 300 fans, silent as stone, waiting. Elvis didn't crack a joke. He didn't fire back. Instead, he adjusted the mic with calm hands, closed his eyes, and strummed a single chord on his guitar. The sound rang like a spark in the dark. Then he began to sing. His voice, low, aching, unstoppable, poured into the studio. Every note rose from the deepest part of him, raw and defiant. It wasn't the polished movie star. It was the boy from Tupelo, the man who had once shaken the world awake with sound. The host blinked, his smile slipping. The cameras caught it. The moment he realized the joke was over, the crowd erupted, their cheers crashing against the walls, drowning out everything but Elvis. He sang with fire. He sang with pain. He sang with dignity. The audience rose to their feet, clapping in rhythm, some with tears streaming down their faces. A woman near the stage dropped her scarf onto the floor, overwhelmed, clutching her chest. It was no longer about one song. It was a declaration, Binder whispered, almost to himself. That's it. That's the moment. The host shrank into the shadows, his voice silenced, his role erased. No one cared for his smirk anymore. All eyes were fixed on Elvis, reclaiming his crown note by note. The energy surged higher with every chorus. Elvis's foot tapped, his body swayed, the leather glistened under the lights. The room wasn't laughing now, it was roaring, and the roar spread beyond those walls, captured forever on magnetic tape, destined to travel into living rooms across America. Short bursts. Pure power, he leaned forward. He smiled. He sang. For those who doubted, this was the answer. For those who mocked, this was the reply. What would you have done in that moment? Retreat into silence, or rise like this, transforming humiliation into history? The host turned away, his grin gone, while the king stood taller than ever, his voice unshakable. The crowd screamed his name, and in that storm of sound, something shifted. Elvis wasn't defending himself anymore. He was reminding the world who he truly was. And as the final note rang out, echoing into the rafters, the silence that followed felt like thunder. The moment his song ended, the studio erupted. 300 voices crashed together, rising higher than the rafters of NBC Burbank. People stomped their feet, clapped their hands, shouted his name until their throats ached. Elvis lowered the guitar, breathing hard, sweat shining across his temples. But his smile was different now. It wasn't nervous. It was steady, proud, alive. He had turned a stage trap into a coronation. The band, sensing the shift, leaned in. Drums hit sharper. Guitars followed his rhythm, chasing every movement. They weren't just playing with him anymore. They were chasing him, trying to keep up with the fire he had lit. The host stood frozen near the curtains, shrinking smaller with every cheer. His power had vanished. The crowd was no longer laughing with him. They had given their loyalty back to Elvis. The king had reclaimed the crown by sheer force of presence. Binder scribbled notes on a pad, his hands shaking. Later, he would tell reporters, that night wasn't television, it was rebirth. A scarf drifted down from the balcony, tossed by a woman with tears streaming down her cheeks. A man near the back raised his old concert ticket, waving it like a flag, as if to prove he had always believed. These weren't just fans anymore. They were witnesses to something holy. Elvis glanced at them, nodded once, and launched into another song. Louder, fiercer. The audience roared as if they'd been waiting years to release this storm. And as the music soared, the host slipped quietly into the background. His microphone lowered, his voice gone. He was no longer part of the story. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This was redemption. How many of us have faced someone who doubted us and felt that fire inside? How many of us dream of the moment when doubt breaks and we rise instead of fall? That night Elvis showed it was possible, not by fighting back with words, but by answering with truth. His voice, his heart, his music, and every soul in that room felt it. The following morning, newspapers carried the story across America. Variety printed the headline in bold, "Elvis is back and stronger than ever." A photograph showed him in the black leather jacket, guitar slung low, eyes burning with fire. The host's jokes were never mentioned. They were already forgotten. Bootleg recordings spread quickly. Fans traded reel-to-reel tapes, their voices hushed with awe. "You have to hear it," they whispered. "You have to feel it." Across state lines, across oceans, the performance became legend. Colonel Parker bragged to reporters that Elvis had silenced his critics, but even he knew it went beyond business. This was not just television, it was resurrection. Years later, a plaque was placed at NBC's Burbank studio. On this stage, June 27, 1968, Elvis Presley reclaimed his crown. Tourists still stopped to touch it, snapping photographs, whispering as though standing in a cathedral. Fan clubs preserved artifacts from that night. A program with Elvis's sweat stains, a scarf dropped from the balcony. A diary entry from a fan named Maria read simply, "We saw the king rise again. I will never forget the sound." The host faded into obscurity. His name, once sharp, was blurred by time, but Elvis's voice from that night still plays on documentaries, in museums, in the hearts of those who remember. Legends aren't made in comfort. They are born in trials, and that night in Burbank proved that when Elvis was pressed to the edge, he didn't break. He burned brighter. What if every moment of mockery we face could become the fuel for our greatest victory? In that studio on June 27, 1968, Elvis taught something greater than music. He showed that humiliation does not have to end in shame. It can be reshaped, transformed into art, into power, into history. The host tried to reduce him to a punchline. Instead, Elvis answered with truth, not anger, not insult, just his voice. The same voice that had carried him from a two-room house in Tupelo to stages around the world. When the leather jacket gleamed under the lights and the crowd roared his name, it wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a lesson. The lesson that dignity, once defended, becomes untouchable. Generations later, the story is still told. Fans gather at anniversaries of the '68 comeback special, replaying the grainy footage, pointing out the moment when silence broke and greatness filled the room. The host's jokes have vanished into dust, but Elvis's answer remains immortal. Every one of us faces moments like that. A cruel word, a mocking laugh, a test when others want us to fail, and in those moments, we have a choice: to shrink, to fight, or, like Elvis, to rise with truth that no one can deny. pain can become beauty, shame can become triumph, and a single act of grace can echo longer than any insult. That is why millions still whisper about the night Elvis silenced the room. It was never just about music. It was about the courage to stand tall when the world tries to bend you low. Would you have found the strength to rise? Or would the laughter have broken you? This story isn't just about Elvis. It's about every one of us. Share this with someone who's faced doubt and turned it into strength. Were you alive to see the '68 comeback? Tell us your memory below. And if you want more untold legends like this, don't miss our next story.